Hello and welcome to NJBIZ Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Kanij. My guest today is David Greek. He is the managing partner of Greek Real Estate Partners. David, welcome back.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. You are also the chair of Circulate NJ, which is an advocacy group for the logistics industry, and I wanted to start there. First of all, I'm curious about the impetus for for starting this group and how you got involved in it. What was the thinking behind the need to form this kind of organization?
I think there's been a long-standing need for this type of organization, particularly in our state. There's been a mounting degree of frustration from both the developer community, but also the larger kind of logistics community. And that includes truckers, warehousers, anyone that is involved in the distribution of goods, not just the people building the facilities. That the frustration started to mount, especially over the last couple of years, as a lot of industrial development has been added to the state's pipeline over the last 10
Indeed.
years. There's been increased public pushback on new developments in particular. And as a result of that, and as a function of social media primarily being the place where a lot of the opposition to industrial uses gather, we started noticing a lot of misinformation and misconstrued facts about both our industry and the projects that were being opposed. Doing a public awareness type campaign is not something that I think a lot of the real estate industry is familiar with or comfortable with. So there was, I think, an extreme reluctance for a long time from members of our industry to put the time and resources toward a project like this because there wasn't a lot of experience with how effective these campaigns could be and how measurable the outcomes could be.
Okay.
But I think within the last year, the amount of frustration and the amount of negative information that was coming about the industry reached a point where enough of us within the industry said something, we have to try something. And so, we gathered a lot of the industry members into a voluntary coalition with basically the goal of trying to balance the narrative, especially in the media, and show that certainly we're not discounting any of the concerns that opposers to the industrial uses have. There are certainly some externalities to these industrial developments that do impact the local community. But there was so much focus on just that side of the equation and
Okay.
no attention being paid to the major benefits that this has to both our state and to the people working in these facilities, and to just everyday New Jersey citizens. Is one
Okay.
thing a lot of people don't realize is that they interact with industrial real estate on a daily basis, whether they're aware of it or not. So
Mhm.
part of the goal of this organization is to just put that message out there because we didn't see it being talked about enough.
Okay. All right. I apologize. Zoom was acting up a little bit, so I just want to clarify. It sounded to me like this basically was a reaction to some of the backlash that we've actually covered too, to what was a really explosive growth in warehouses and that kind of construction. So the audience for this, just so that I'm clear and our viewers can get the full story. The audience is the general public essentially for the message that you're trying to get out.
Absolutely, that's correct. This is not a lobbying organization.
Okay.
We are not lobbying any policymakers for any public policy. This is simply a grassroots effort to spread the message of the benefits that industrial brings to New Jersey.
Okay. And so then what is the message? You started to talk, you mentioned that the folks interact with industrial uses whether they realize it or not. What are you telling them? What are the examples? How do you bring that home to people?
Well, I think there's a couple different planks to what we're laying out as the benefits. I'll start with kind of the easiest to explain, which is the economic benefits.
Right.
It is one of the largest employers in the state is the logistics industry. It makes up a very large portion of our annual GDP. It employs hundreds of thousands of people. and particularly on the economic side, kind of getting into the weeds a little bit more, we want to show how jobs have changed in these facilities, especially over the past 20 years, and do away with some misconceptions about the types of people that work in these facilities or the types of jobs that these facilities produce. There is a misconception that they're generally speaking transient workers that aren't there long term and might not have any specific skill sets. I think that may have been largely true 30 years ago. Today, it's really couldn't be further from the truth. So showing the how good these jobs are, how well they pay, the long-term nature of them, especially compared to kind of some of the other job opportunities for the people that are working in these facilities. That's a big plank of our platform to really humanize the economic benefits that our facilities bring, and the amount of attention that we pay as builders to making sure that these are good facilities to work in and can attract the workers that they need.
Okay.
Another important plank of ours is environmental, believe it or not. New Jersey benefits quite a bit environmentally from the development of industrial sites. That's not really something that the public has ever really paid too much attention to or really been made aware of. But one of the most common ways to remediate a brownfield site in our state over the past 30 years has been to build an industrial use on top of it and to
Right.
encapsulate the contamination within that site, control it within that site, and use that development as the final remedial action to close the site environmentally. And the number of sites that have been taken through that industrial redevelopment process and taken from unproductive land that wasn't producing any tax revenue or jobs for the local community, and also potentially further contaminating the land around it, to something that was producing tax revenue and jobs and cleaned up an environmental issue in the interim. So that is a big part of our platform that we don't think we get enough recognition for, because often that happens well before the point where the public might be aware of or get involved with the project. So that's a major point we are advocating for. And lastly, like I said, it's not just the macro impact of industrial. It's also we want to make it clear to individuals how important it is to their lifestyles today to continue to build out logistics networks and make them more efficient within our state. So, focusing on the convenience that e-commerce in particular has brought to consumer segments that often don't get paid attention to.
Right.
People that can't leave the home for several reasons or just want the convenience of not having to show up to a physical location to do their shopping. And that trend, we know that it's not just New Jersey, but the whole country really enjoys that convenience and
Right.
is willing to pay for that convenience as well. So just kind of reminding everyone that in order to continue that very good adaptation to their lifestyle, we need to continue to build out these facilities, and these facilities are what is going to continue to make that service available to everybody, make it cheaper for everybody, make it more available for more types of services.
Okay. Well, you have a compelling story, obviously, and our viewers, I mean, they don't need to be convinced of the kinds of things that you're saying, but I'm curious as to how you reach what I'm guessing is a fairly diffuse audience. You mentioned social media. Is that essentially the strategy to try to reach people where they are?
I think right now the strategy is primarily through our social media outreach and conversations like this with
Uh-huh.
important, gatekeepers and journalists like yourself, that will help spread the message. NJBIZ has, in my opinion, done a fantastic job covering our industry and presents a very balanced opinion. So we're also looking to broaden the types of journalists we're talking to not just be talking to the
Right.
sophisticated journalists like yourself, but also the ones that are kind of at behind some of the negative messaging as well. And not necessarily to convince them that our position is correct, but just to provide them with you know, the alternative view of the benefits of this as well. So we are right now, we are a member-funded organization. We do have, limited resources that are based on the members stepping up and funding this themselves. So we're trying to do as much as we can with very few resources. And the scale of,
Welcome to the club.
how many ad buys we do, et cetera, like we'll kind of have to be determined as we gain membership in over the next few months.
Okay, well, that was sort of my next question was what are the priorities? What are your biggest challenges so far? Obviously, a member-funded organization with limited resources, that sounds like the biggest challenge. Just how do you actually pay for the kind of messaging that you're looking for? Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, with more economic resources, we can broadcast louder and larger. But we recognize that, this is something our industry members can only devote so many of their resources to. We also have a lot of members of our coalition that may not be contributing financially, but are contributing with their knowledge or their network. And that has been a great help to try and make our monetary resources go further. But I think, I have a limited network. I've been working very closely with Dan Kennedy at NIOP with this, who has a much bigger network than I have.
Right.
But we've seen, just since we launched Circulate a couple months ago in the public sphere, as people become aware of it that might not know me personally, we've got a lot of outreach for people saying, we want to be part of this, and we think this is important, and we want to dedicate our resources to helping you spread this message. So we expect that to continue. By spreading the message through organizations like NJBIZ, continuing to spread through NIOP and other industry organizations, we think we can continue to grow our coalition base in a way that's going to make this financially sustainable for a long time, hopefully.
Okay. Now you said you're not a lobbying organization, but obviously when opposition to some of these projects props up, they're dealing with probably the local planning boards and the local governing bodies. Is there any way to reach them, or are you just doing it indirectly to try to convince the folks who would show up at those meetings to oppose what's going on, to maybe not be so vociferous, or maybe stay home and watch TV instead of doing that?
I think there's always going to be opposition to any real estate development, not just industrial. So I don't think we're under the illusion that, a positive messaging campaign is going to make everybody stay home and not comment on our projects. Nor do I think that would necessarily be a good outcome. We do want the public involved.
Right.
We just don't want them involved in a way that deliberately slows down the process based on misinformation, which has been occurring more and more and more in our projects over the last couple of years. So this is an attempt. We are not, like I said, we're not targeting legislators, but legislators, planning board members, local government they are members of our community. And in fact, many planning board members are not professional politicians and have other day jobs and are volunteers and do this voluntarily, and may see the same sources of misinformation that the general public sees and lead them to the wrong conclusion about the intentions of our development. So they're certainly part of the messaging we're targeting at. We're not recommending specific policy. We're not lobbying for specific policy, but I think what will help, particularly members of local government, is to both remind them and give them the verbiage to articulate exactly what the benefits of these types of developments can be. And again, because generally the media has not been able to do that, and not been able to provide these with the kind of clear, positive talking points, when they're faced with public opposition, they often don't know how to respond in a way that, shows that they are in favor of these types of projects, and why. So we're hopefully helping give them some talking points to help articulate exactly why they do favor these projects and why it would be good for the community.
Okay. And how do you see your role in both the organization and the effort to get the message out? Are you maybe a spokesperson, a fundraiser, the face of the organization, all of the above? How do you what do you spend your days doing when you're working on these issues?
Yes, I'll say first off that well, I kind of fell into this position. It's certainly something I'm passionate about and advocated for strongly amongst my peers. But I think once we got the kind of consensus among a core group of kind of founding members of Circulate, because I had felt it was so important and been pushing it, I was kind of nominated to be the face and the leader.
Okay.
Um, and yes, my role is all the things you listed.
Okay.
I am one of a few of the members that are going to be actively talking to the public and be the face. I'm not the only one. We have
Okay.
several members that have joined up in the past few months that represent kind of different constituencies, like truckers, like warehousers. I'm a real estate developer, which is a number of our members are, but this is really to encompass the entire industry. So we're hopefully going to be seeing a few people other than myself speak on behalf of this organization in the coming months with slightly different perspectives and slightly different backgrounds.
Okay.
Um, but to bring that home, if anyone listening to this or reading this has interest in joining the organization, you can certainly reach out to myself. You can reach out to Dan Kennedy, the CEO of NIOP New Jersey, or Chris Donnelly, who runs our communications team for Circulate.
Okay, very good. Now, the backdrop to all of this has been the strength of the industrial market. In my 6 years here, that's been a constant in terms of what's driving the commercial real estate market in the state. I'm curious, just to sort of broaden the conversation a little bit about your assessment of the state of the market now. Has it been cooling off a bit? I mean, we've got a sort of hints of that happening. What do you how do you see where things stand right now?
It has cooled off. Certainly, I think our market, industrial in particular, peaked in terms of value and in terms of activity, probably the end of 2022 through the middle of 2023. And since then, while not all values or rents have declined, certainly the data doesn't suggest that we have declined in a lot of areas. Some areas have. There's been an increasing struggle to grow. Primarily, that's been driven by a slowdown in leasing,
Okay.
and tenants, being more reluctant to sign deals that require large capital expenditures out of their pocket or large financial commitments in the future. It all boils down to, both uncertainty about the economic future and particularly uncertainty about the cost of capital moving forward.
Okay.
Um, so it all kind of makes sense. There's also what I kind of explain as a bit of a hangover effect here from the frenzy that occurred during COVID. And
Mm.
COVID created a lot of supply chain problems
Right.
that created a lot of kind of short-term need for industrial space that after those supply chain problems got corrected or cleared up, some of that demand went away. So we've kind of been hit on two sides within the industrial industry with probably companies taking more space than they needed in 22 and 23, as well as a pullback in kind of organic growth of tenancies in the market. That's caused a slowdown in leasing. That's caused a slowdown in building as well. And that's, I think, the optimistic side of the story from a value perspective is the amount of speculative industrial product that's being delivered both the second half of last year and what we anticipate into 2025 is significantly smaller than what our industry was delivering at peak demand.
Okay.
Um, we kind of expect demand and supply to normalize this year, to a point where rents will probably start to grow again modestly, and there will be less options for tenants in the market that are seeking space and give property owners of that space a little bit more pricing power in their rents.
Okay. Well, that's what I was going to ask where you think growth might come from. Is it simply just the balancing of supply and demand, or are there new areas? For example, we've written a lot about cold storage and
Oh
the
yeah.
need for those kinds of things. Are there new kinds of projects sort of on the horizon, or is it just sort of riding through the cycle for growth at this point?
I think it's a bit of both.
Okay.
Certainly, there's always going to be a cyclical nature to some aspects of real estate, but there is. You mentioned one of them. Cold storage has been somewhat less impacted by those macro trends, and there's some specific trends to cold storage, both in the way that Americans consume food and where we source our food from,
Right.
that have continued to help grow that industry in particular, while the rest of the industrial space may have experienced a slowdown in comparison. Um, those are typically specialized buildings, typically built to suit for the particular tenants. So in some ways, that will help the market continue to grow, but it won't necessarily help the absorption of the vacant space today.
Hmm.
The other kind of, it's not a new use, but it is becoming a more economically viable use for a lot of sites is data centers.
Data centers, yes. Mhm.
And that, typically they're much larger projects financially. They're more complicated and take longer, but there will be several sites across the state that we anticipated becoming distribution centers that will not be, and will be oriented more towards a data center use.
Okay.
And that should help, again, help balance the supply and demand, and helps accelerate some of the absorption, by not having those sites deliver extra space into a market that's already trying to absorb some space.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. But finally, before I let you go, you mentioned concerns, uncertainty about the broader economy, the cost of capital. What do you see for the rest of the year? Excuse me. Are you optimistic, confident about the way things are going, or are you concerned? You're smiling, so I'm guessing I'm not asking you for a prediction about where the economy is going to go. I'm just curious
Yeah,
as to when you look out down the road, what do you worry about? What keeps you up, or what makes you feel like it's going to be a good year?
I think the reason I smile when you ask that question is my answer changes very frequently. We
Okay.
try
Well,
and
you're not the only
stay.
one, I'm sure.
Yeah, that I think that's kind of where I was going with the answer is there's a lot that's happening in the world and in the US, both in policy and in kind of fundal economics,
Right.
that is pretty untested. And it's hard to look back to history and find a similar period of time and compare it to now, and really have confidence that you can predict the outcome. And I think a lot of both my peers in the real estate industry, but kind of the broader investment community as well, share that sentiment that we're on somewhat untreaded ground in a lot of respects economically. Um, and it's really hard when you're in this position to extrapolate what might occur. And so we try and stay nimble and adjustable and read data actively and pay attention to the signs, that could indicate what the future will bring, particularly around interest rates.
Right.
And those signs change so frequently these days that my opinion has to change frequently as well. So my getting to actually answer your question now, our my expectation is that there will be some movement in interest rates this year. I think it will be less than consensus in terms of the amount of drops we get. And right now we're seeing a bit of tug of war between what Fed policy wants to do versus what the public bond markets in particular are pricing, as if they will do, if that makes
Okay.
any sense. So
Yeah.
there's that's kind of the one thing that does keep me up at night, is that it seems that the pricing of treasuries and the pricing of public bonds, don't necessarily align with the perceived goals of the Fed, and that could cause some serious market tension going into the spring and the summer of this year. And as you said earlier, uncertainty kind of is an economic killer. So
Right.
that amount of uncertainty does make me concerned. And I am hopeful, though. I'm hopeful that um, we will have a soft landing, so to speak. We've been, I think, gliding the plane towards the runway very well the last year. And now it's just a matter of can we stick the landing?
Okay. Very good. Well, I hope you come back and let us know how your opinion is changing and whether or not you did stick the landing because as you say, there's a lot going on and there's a lot to come, I think. So,
Certainly.
all right, David Greek, managing partner of Greek Real Estate Partners. Thanks again for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.